Hey everyone, it's Joe Kral with the Society of St. Sebastian, and again, welcome to this week's edition of Pro-Life University. We're going to just kind of dive into this particular subject this week. We're going to discuss the issue surrounding the loosening of COVID-19 restrictions, and some of these folks that keep trying to argue that loosening these restrictions are somehow anti-life. I think this is an important topic. I've seen a lot of articles out there lately that have tried to make the argument that somehow loosening these COVID-19 restrictions are somehow contrary to being pro-life. And those that want to keep strict lockdown sorts of procedures in place are acting in a pro-life sort of way. There's a lot of issues to address here. There's a lot of meat to the issue. So let's go ahead and just dive on in, and hopefully you learn a thing or two regarding this issue, because there's really a lot of ethics that are involved. And speaking of that, let's just address this one particular issue. Now, you, me, pretty much everyone in the world, right, has been listening to a lot of medical and scientific experts regarding this new novel coronavirus, the COVID-19 virus. And sometimes even the doctors don't necessarily agree with one another, but we are hearing a lot from these experts, and that is a good in and of itself. However, some of the things that we're not hearing from, we're certainly not necessarily hearing experts from business or economics or even ethics. Unfortunately, many in the news media sort of see themselves as public policy experts, see themselves as business experts, see themselves as even ethics experts. And that's just simply not the case. So in many respects, sometimes we sort of get this bubble, if you will, that where they're just talking to themselves and they're not really relaying the kind of information that is needed for the audience, for the viewers, such as you or myself. And in some cases, certainly politicians are not necessarily listening to certain types of experts themselves. Now, ethics really kind of involves itself here. Why? Because we've got to make prudential decisions. Governors have to make prudential decisions regarding, are they going to loosen these restrictions? Are they going to enforce them even harsher, or what? And so these are sorts of decisions where ethics takes a play in. And so there's certain things that are going on here that are at play. One of the things that we desperately need to note here, and this is certainly my perspective, my professional opinion as an ethicist, is that we have a conflict of interests here. Right? Obviously, many people are worried about their right to health, to their right to well-being, right? Not to get sick, and that's understandable. Right? If you know you're sick, you do have the duty not to go out and infect others. Right? Plain and simple. I think that most reasonable people would agree with that sort of premises, that if you're sick, you should stay home. And it doesn't matter what kind of sickness you have, whether it's the flu, whether it's, other, pneumonia, what have you, all right? Any other sort of infectious sorts of diseases, if you have it, you don't need to go around and spreading them, right? But we're also dealing with another particular interest here as well. Now, we know, for example, medically speaking, that people that have underlying comorbidities, all right, meaning that they have other underlying medical issues associated with them, tend to have a reaction to the COVID-19 virus that is not necessarily a very good thing. The body seems to obviously not be able to fight it off very well. And so we want to make sure that those folks are healthy. But at the same time, we have to understand that we live in a society where people have duties, moral duties that they have to perform. So, for example, all right, we could talk about, the idea of right to healthcare, or even the right to life, for example. That seems to be the big one people want to focus on, and so let's focus on it. So again, and you've heard me say this before, I derive rights from moral duties. So I have a moral duty not to kill people, right? And as a result, I derive that right to life. All right. But we can sit there and certainly expand this sort of thing. Now, what does this duty encompass? All right, this can encompass many duties. So if I'm a provider for a family, that may mean I have to go out and provide for my family so they, don't become bankrupt, so they don't become, starving individuals. All right, you go out and you have to provide. You have to put food on the table. You have that obligation to do so. Right, and so what we're seeing here are these conflicts of rights. Right. Now, we got to understand, all right, many governors are trying to balance, these duties and constitutional rights with the right of people to have their well-being as well. And so it's a careful balancing act. All these sort of circumstances got to be weighed, if you will, all right? What's the infection rate of COVID-19? How, is this going to affect the economy? How is this going to affect small business? How is this going to affect the person that has to provide for their family and, literally relies on an hourly paid job? Right? So these are all sorts of things that have got to come into play when we talk about this sort of thing. So let me just sit there and certainly simply say this right now, because I definitely think it's important. All right. One, it is not a violation of the right to life to try to loosen these COVID-19 restrictions and do it prudentially, which many of these governors are definitely trying to do. Opening certain businesses. Maybe those businesses are only opened at 25% capacity, maybe even a little bit less. Right? They're trying to take those prudential steps, right, to ensure, that people, especially those who are more prone to the illness and more prone to get sicker, and even even face death because of the illness, right? Try to protect those people. That's important. But two, we also need to understand when it comes to this particular thing, some people are trying to equate it with abortion. Like, well, you say you're against abortion, but this governor is loosening up restrictions and more people are going to die. Well, we got to be very careful here because that's really a comparison between apples and oranges, right? Plain and simple. One deals with the direct intentional destruction of human life, where one individual directly destroys the individual life of another. Obviously, that would be abortion. Right? Here, we don't necessarily have that. All right, people just don't like what the governor may be saying and so forth, and so they just want to throw that sort of hyperbole out there. That massive exaggeration and say, "Oh, we caught you in a contradiction." Well, that's just simply not true. Right? The simple fact is yes, the person certainly does have an obligation to be prudent while going out and doing things in public. So, for example, people are talking about wearing face masks. And if more people are wearing face masks, the less possibility of this disease being spread. Well, that's a prudential action, right? And as far as I know, many governors are still urging their citizens to go out and wear these face masks, right? So we got to be crystal clear here that when we look at the two, right, they're very, very different, right? They're not the exact same thing because both of them, only one of them rather, is dealing with direct killing of an innocent human life. The other one is not, right? Now, the simple fact is someone who has the flu and goes out there and spreads the flu around, right? Still, unless they're going out and trying to get people sick, intentionally trying to go out and get people sick, most people who don't even recognize that they are sick, even with the other flu or other sorts of viral diseases, right, are not directly doing this. All right, there's got to be an intention. You have an object that you're aiming for, and so in many ways this is very, very different. Now, I also want to sit there and say this as well. One of the things that we have definitely learned during this pandemic is that there have been some good exercise of prudence when it comes to developing a policy regarding people staying in and shutting down some businesses for a period of time and so forth. And there have been some states that have had some really poor decisions made. And I'll be honest with you. So, for example, if we look at New York versus Texas again, I recently wrote an article regarding the right to life and abortion, and I did a video on this just a few weeks ago, if you recall. But the simple fact is again, these are two states. We can see in one respect a governor who is trying to take a lot of things in stride and trying to be as prudent as possible versus another state during this time that absolutely did not. It was horrific that, COVID-19 patients would go to a facility, i.e. nursing homes, where they can infect other elderly patients. Now, elderly patients were more prone to get sick and more prone to get sicker and were more prone to die because of this illness. We knew this early on. And the simple fact is he mandated that these nursing homes take that. And that's why you see such a horrible sort of death rate coming out of New York, whereas you don't see that sort of death rate in Texas. And so it's significant to note that in many ways we see, even at the beginning, there were some strong prudential decisions that had to be made. Now we're obviously at a point where many weeks later, we're over 2 months into this sort of thing. And the simple fact is now governors have got to make some more prudential decisions, right? Letting businesses open up. And again, urging the public to be prudent when they go out there. Because we got to remember, every citizen also has to act in a moral way as well. They can't just sit there and willy-nilly and go, well, hey, I'm just going to do this and do what I want, regardless of what anyone says, right? We've got to be prudent too. So we as pro-lifers certainly need to be prudent. So that's why I certainly argue that, as pro-lifers, we need to put the mask on and be aware that this helps reduce the risk of the disease being spread, right? That is what, many of the experts are saying. And so I think when you have many of these sorts of experts that are saying that, you need to take that sort of circumstance into consideration before you go out and you do whatever you want to do. We got to understand actions have consequences, right, whether intended or not. And so we need to sometimes think about these unforeseen consequences as well. We don't want someone's grandmother getting sick just because we felt that the mask was uncomfortable or we didn't like it or what have you. We still have to take those sorts of prudential steps. Now, again, let me just be clear on this. Again, the comparison that somehow these governors are being anti-life is just plain wrong, right? That is not the case. In many ways, these governors are trying to weigh their options. And so by loosening these restrictions, right, we understand that, we've reached a certain point now to where we can engage in public life, not just from a medical and scientific point of view, but from other sorts of issues that we've got to deal with as well. People have to provide for their families. That's just a strict truth, right? We can't expect government just to keep giving us money. That's not what government's for. It's not built to do that. It's certainly a good way to bankrupt your government eventually and so on. But the simple truth of the matter is people have that obligation to go out, provide for your family, bring food back so they can feed themselves, be able to provide, medical care, obviously paying your insurance company or paying for the doctor bills and so forth and so on, right? So you've got to do certain things to provide for your family, even just keep the roof over your head. So, families might have to either pay rent for their apartment, obviously pay for their mortgage. We just can't expect, government to pay for everything. And so, we as individuals have to go and live up to our responsibilities too. In many respects, it looks like this disease is beginning to die down. And I say that with caution, all right? So please understand, I say that with great caution here. But the simple fact is we know now that we can go out and we can diligently and prudently do things, right? We were doing this even during the tight times of restriction during this time of quarantine. And so many people were still going to the grocery store. Many people were still even going to the hardware store. So it's still, go out, act prudently. Obviously, you're able to go out a little bit more and express your freedoms a little bit more. But again, we have to do this prudently. Well, I hope this was informative for you all. Again, I appreciate everything. Give us a big thumbs up, right? Hey. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them down on the comments. And hey, if you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe. And hey, if you got a buddy that probably needs to know this, be sure to share the video. Again, we appreciate everything that you do, and I hope you have a great weekend. God bless.